Alina stood frozen in the doorway of their marble-floored penthouse, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly as she stared at the phone screen glowing in the darkness. Her husband's phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, lit up with a message that made her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Same place tomorrow. I can't wait to see you again. L. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet as 6 months of pregnancy hormones mixed with a cockling of fear, betrayal, and disbelief, and for a moment, Alina thought she might collapse right there on the cold floor of the home she'd built with Marcus over 5 years of what she believed was a perfect marriage. But now, she wondered if any of it had been real at all. She had noticed the changes over the past 2 months, the hushed phone calls he'd take in another room, the mysterious appointments that appeared on his calendar marked only with a single letter L, the way he'd started coming home later on Thursdays, with a strange lightness in his eyes that she'd initially mistaken for excitement about the baby, and the receipts she'd found in his jacket pocket from an upscale cafe in the Arts District, a neighborhood he'd never mentioned visiting, always for 2 coffees, 1 regular and 1 hot chocolate. Alina had tried to convince herself she was being paranoid, that pregnancy was making her emotional and irrational, that Marcus, the man who'd held her through her father's death, who'd surprised her with a rooftop dinner on their first anniversary, who'd cried when they saw their baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound, would never betray her. But the evidence kept mounting like stones in her chest, each one heavier than the last. She remembered how they'd met at a charity gala 7 years ago, how he'd been different from the other wealthy men in the room, genuinely interested in the cause rather than the networking opportunities, how he'd asked about her work at the Children's Literacy Foundation with real curiosity in his dark eyes, how their first date had lasted until sunrise as they talked about everything from their childhood dreams to their fears about living up to their potential, and how he'd told her on their 2nd anniversary that she'd made him believe in goodness. Again, after years of cutthroat business dealings had hardened his heart. Now, standing in the darkness with his phone in her trembling hands, Alina felt that entire history crumbling, and she couldn't stop herself from scrolling through the messages, each one a fresh knife wound. Today was wonderful. Thank you for everything. You make me feel so special. I look forward to our time together all week. And the most recent, I know we have to keep this private, but it means the world to me. The tears came hot and fast, streaming down her face as she gripped the marble counter for support, her mind racing with images she couldn't bear. Marcus with another woman, Marcus building a secret life, Marcus planning to leave her and their unborn child. Then the betrayal felt even more cruel, because she was carrying his baby, vulnerable and dependent, her body transformed by their shared creation while he was apparently sharing himself with someone else. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, returning from his home office, and she quickly set the phone down, wiping her face. But he immediately noticed her distress, his expressions shifting from calm to concerned as he rushed toward her asking what was wrong. And she couldn't hold it in anymore, couldn't pretend, couldn't protect herself from the truth she was terrified to hear. "Who is L?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And she watched his face drain of color, watched him freeze watched what looked like genuine panic flash across his features. And somehow that reaction hurt more than anything because it confirmed her worst fears. There was a secret. There was someone else, and she'd been blind to it while growing their child inside her body. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, ran his hand through his dark hair in that gesture she knew meant he was stressed, and finally said, "Alina, I can explain, but it's not what you think," which was exactly what guilty people said, exactly the phrase she'd heard in a dozen movies and never thought she'd hear in her own life. And she felt something inside her shift from heartbreak to fury, a protective rage for herself and her baby that gave her strength despite her tears. "Not what I think," she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "I've seen the messages, Marcus, the secret meetings, the cafe receipts, The way you sneak off every Thursday like you have another life I'm not part of. I'm standing here, 6 months pregnant with your child, and you're having secret coffee dates with someone named Elle, who can't wait to see you again." She watched him struggle for words, watched the emotions play across his face: guilt, fear, frustration, and something else she couldn't identify. And when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "Please, let me show you something. Come with me right now, and I'll explain everything. I know how this looks, and I've been a fool for not telling you sooner, but please, Alina, trust me one more time." There was something in his eyes, a desperate sincerity that didn't match the profile of a cheating husband, and despite her anger and hurt, despite every instinct telling her to protect herself, she found herself nodding, grabbing her coat, and following him to the car in tense silence, her hand never leaving her belly, as if she could shield their baby from whatever revelation was coming. They drove through the city as evening fell, the lights blurring past her window, while Marcus gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, glancing at her every few seconds, as if afraid she might disappear. And finally they pulled up to a modest neighborhood far from their usual haunts, stopping in front of a small community center, with warm light spilling from its windows. "She's inside," Marcus said quietly, and Alina felt her heart constrict, felt the reality of she like a physical blow. But she stepped out of the car and followed him through the doors, into a bright room filled with easels and paint supplies and children's artwork covering every wall. And there, standing by a canvas with paint-stained hands and a bright smile, was not the sophisticated other woman Alina had imagined, but a young girl, no more than 12 years old, with dark curly hair and eyes that lit up the moment she saw Marcus. "Marcus," the girl called out, running toward him, then stopping short when she noticed Alina, her expression becoming shy and uncertain, and Alina stood frozen, her mind racing to recalibrate everything she'd believed about this moment. Marcus knelt down to the girl's level, his voice gentle. "Lily, there's someone very important I want you to meet. This is my wife, Elena. Elena, this is Lily." The girl gave a small wave, clutching a paintbrush, and Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Lily is the daughter of James Patterson, my former business partner, and I've been spending time with her every Thursday for the past 3 months." Alina felt the ground shift again, but in a different direction this time, as memories surfaced. James Patterson, the brilliant strategist who'd helped Marcus build his company in the early years, who'd died suddenly 2 years ago from a heart attack at 41, whose death had devastated Marcus for months, sending him into a depression where he'd questioned everything about the cost of success. Marcus stood, facing Alina with tears in his eyes, and began to explain. "After James died, I found out that his wife, Sarah, was struggling terribly. James had been the breadwinner, and while there was some life insurance, it wasn't nearly enough. Sarah was working 2 jobs just to keep their apartment, and Lily was coming home to an empty house every day, her grades dropping, her spirit fading. I felt responsible. Alina, James died of stress and overwork, and I was the one who pushed for those brutal deadlines, those 80-hour weeks. I killed my friend with ambition." His voice broke, and Alina felt her anger beginning to dissolve into something more complex. "I reached out to Sarah," Marcus continued, "and set up a trust fund for Lily's education and their living expenses. But Sarah insisted they didn't want charity, that James wouldn't have wanted that. So we compromised. I would mentor Lily, spend time with her like the uncle she'd lost when she lost her father, and in exchange, I could help with some of their larger expenses as family support. Every Thursday, I've been taking Lily to art classes here, something she loved but they couldn't afford anymore. And then we get hot chocolate and talk about her week, her dreams, her memories of her father." Lily nodded enthusiastically, holding up her canvas to show Alina a beautiful painting of a sunset. "Marcus has been teaching me about my daddy's work too, and telling me stories about him. Mama's been so much happier since she doesn't have to work nights anymore. Alina felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears, complicated tears of relief and guilt and overwhelming emotion. And when she looked at her husband, she saw not a betrayer, but a man carrying a burden of grief and responsibility he'd thought he had to carry alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely controlled. "Why all the secrecy? Did you think I wouldn't understand? That I wouldn't want to help?" Marcus stepped closer, his own tears falling freely now. "At first, it was because I was ashamed. I felt like I'd killed James, and I didn't know how to articulate that guilt to anyone, even you. Then, as I got to know Lily, as she started opening up to me about missing her father, I realized this had become something sacred. This weekly ritual of keeping James's memory alive for his daughter. I didn't tell you about the financial support, because I knew you'd insist on being involved. And Sarah was already so uncomfortable with help from me. Adding my wife to the equation felt like it would make it worse. And then you got pregnant. And everything became more complicated because I knew you'd worry that I was replacing our future child with someone else's daughter. Or that I was taking resources from our family, even though that's not true at all." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "I was wrong to keep this from you. I was wrong to make you doubt us, doubt me, especially now. I didn't know how to do everything right. How to honor James, support his family, prepare for our baby, and be the husband you deserve. I thought I could manage it all separately, but I hurt you instead, and I'm so sorry." Alina looked at this man she'd married, seeing him with new eyes, not perfect, not without flaws, but fundamentally good, carrying his guilt and trying to make amends in the only way he knew how. And she thought about how easy it was to assume the worst, how quickly trust could fracture, how love required not just feeling but communication, vulnerability, the courage to share even the darkest corners of our hearts. She looked at Lily, this child who'd lost her father too soon, who was watching them with worried eyes, clearly afraid she'd caused trouble. And Alina felt her protective instincts kick in, the same ones that made her hand rest on her pregnant belly, and she realized that love wasn't a finite resource, that Marcus's care for this child didn't diminish his love for their family, but expanded it, showed her the depth of his capacity for loyalty and compassion. "I wish you'd told me," Alina said finally, her voice steady now, "because I would have wanted to be part of this. James was kind to me at our wedding, told me I was getting a good man, and I see now that you're trying to be a good man to his memory, to his family. But Marcus, we're married, we're about to be parents. You can't carry these burdens alone anymore. That's not how partnership works." She turned to Lily, kneeling down with some difficulty given her pregnant belly, and smiled at the girl. "Your painting is beautiful, Lily. Would you tell me about it?" And as the young girl enthusiastically explained her artistic choices, her face glowing with the attention, Alina felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder, felt the weight of his relief and gratitude, and she knew they would be okay, not because the hurt disappeared instantly, but because they were finally being honest, finally seeing each other fully. Over the next weeks, Alina joined the Thursday visits, getting to know Lily and her mother Sarah, who broke down crying the first time they met, thanking Alina for understanding, for not being angry at the help Marcus had provided. And the four of them, soon to be 5B, came an unexpected family unit, with Lily decorating a onesie for the baby at one of their art sessions, her tongue poking out in concentration as she carefully painted tiny flowers. Marcus and Alina started attending couples counseling, not because their marriage was broken, but because they wanted to build better communication before their baby arrived, wanted to learn how to share their fears and guilt and hopes without letting them fester into secrets. And slowly, the trust that had cracked began to heal stronger than before, like a bone that mends with extra calcium at the break point. When their daughter, Rose, was born on a clear spring morning, Lily was one of the first visitors, bringing a painting she'd made of a garden with roses and lilies growing together. And as Alina watched Marcus hold their newborn while explaining to Lily how to gently touch a baby's soft hand, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The suspicion, the confrontation, the revelation, the healing, all of it necessary to transform them from a couple who kept parts of themselves hidden into a family that chose radical honesty and expansive love. Years later, when Rose was old enough to understand, they told her about Uncle James, the brilliant man who'd helped build their family's success, and about how her father had honored his friend's memory by caring for his daughter, and how her mother had chosen forgiveness and understanding over anger, teaching their daughter that people are complex, that mistakes don't define us if we're willing to grow, that secrets usually hurt more than truth, and that family isn't always about blood, but about who shows up, who stays, who loves even when it's complicated. On Lily's 18th birthday, at her high school graduation, where she gave the valedictorian speech about second chances and chosen family, Alina sat between Marcus and their now 6-year-old Rose, her hand in her husband's, and whispered, "I'm glad I asked who Elle was," and he squeezed her hand, whispering back, "I'm glad you gave me the chance to show you." And in that moment, Alina understood that the greatest love stories aren't about perfection or fairy tale romance, but about two imperfect people choosing each other again and again, even after discovering the secrets that could have broken them, especially after those discoveries, because that's when love becomes not just a feeling but a conscious, courageous choice to believe in each other's best intentions, to forgive the worst mistakes, and to build something stronger from the broken pieces.